Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to Magical Experiments. We're doing a live interview here with Eric McCormick, and we're doing round two because we had some audio issues the first time around. But that is a-okay. We are here. I want to welcome Eric here. So, Eric, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself and where we can find you on Substack.
Hey, Taylor, it's good to be here. My name's Eric McCormick. I am an author and a metaphysicist. I'm author of the book of Sin and Shadow, but most of what I write is published on Substack. Really like the medium and I'm comfortable with it. So I've been posting on there a lot the last couple months since I found it.
Excellent. I'm glad. I've been noticing your writing. I've really been enjoying it. I want to invite or briefly welcome everybody who's on here. I'm not going to say all the names because a whole bunch of people piled in, but welcome. One thing I will encourage for you is for those of you who've joined us live is if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those in as the interview is going on because I love to encourage that kind of active connection. So tell us a little bit about your approach to magic and your magical system. You have a bit of a unique story in terms of how you came up with your magical system and your background, and I'd love to hear a bit about it right now from you.
Okay, I've really started to study magic through the books of Edred Thorson, particularly Futhark and Nine Doors of Midgard. And Nine Doors of Midgard, if you're not familiar with it, is a very um, practical, matter of fact, results driven initiation that takes years to get through. And I did not get through the whole entire thing, but I practiced it daily um, for years without any kind of other influence. I would read, but I didn't apply any other types of magic or any other sorts of sorcery or anything like that. I really focused on using the runes as tools of self-transformation. And I read books by Don Webb, particularly Jason Miller. They greatly influenced me. Frater UD, his books on sigil magic are great. And Coby Michael, his books, The Poison Path Herbalist and The Poison Path Grimoire, really started the eclectic, I guess, part of my journey because he really showed me how to use science and magic together, and that really spoke to me. And so I started doing more experimenting with the poison path and with that kind of folk magic kind of tradition. And now I don't even know what you'd call it. I'm all over the place now, but I don't tend to use a lot of materials. I don't tend to use a lot of different candles or any wands or anything like that. It tends to be just me in an empty room, and that's out of necessity. I spent years not able to burn incense, not able to burn candles, and so I just worked with what I had.
Well, one thing that I really appreciated about what you shared earlier, so we had for folks who are joining here, we had a brief abortive interview that didn't quite work out, sound issues. But one of the things I appreciated earlier that you shared, and so I'll bring it up here, is like the importance of not creating like a prescriptive system of magic, but rather what I call a descriptive system, which is to say that like here we are, we're sharing our writing on Substack. You and I have been exchanging comments back and forth, which I've really appreciated. And no one person's approach is quote unquote right. We all have different approaches and perspectives on magic that we can apply and bring to things. And so the systems that we come up with in a lot of ways are ultimately very personalized. One thing I appreciate about what you're sharing is kind of being able to bring your magic into your body, being able to work with what you have as opposed to necessarily having everything. I think what stops some people sometimes is they think, oh, I've got to have the incense, I've got to have the candles, I've got to have the different tools. But in your case, that wasn't available. So how did you work through that, maybe that initial kind of decision of like, oh, I don't have everything here, but I want to actually work this system. How did you do that? What was your inspiration or your ideas around being able to do that?
It was a book by Don Webb that I read, Energy Magic of the Vampire, which is a very open-handed system of magic. And while I don't apply a lot of the techniques or follow that particular tradition, some of what he said really resonated with me. And he was talking in that book about somebody who practiced his system on a submarine. They were in the Navy, and so they couldn't burn candles and things like that. And that I was like, oh well, I can do it too if he can do it. I would have used the candles and the tools if I would have had them available to me. So I'm kind of glad that I started out in a system where I didn't have that kind of opportunity.
One of the things that I talk about in my own magic system development is the importance of getting rid of needless complexity. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people will get into will do a magical working and they don't understand every step. They don't understand everything that they're doing, but they do it because, well, they read it in a book. And what I always advocate for is get rid of the things that don't make sense to you. Focus on the stuff that makes sense to you and build your system from there, which may seem a little heretical, but I think at the same time, it works really well because sometimes what we really need is we need to give ourselves permission to go with what we actually know and make it work. And one of the ways that it sounds like you did that was by learning to work with your body in particular. So, as somebody who does a lot of magic through my own body and can appreciate that, what would you say would be some best practices for somebody who's getting into magic and maybe doesn't have everything, but they do have their body and they can work with that?
Um, it doesn't take anything to meditate. You don't need any tools to meditate. And that is probably no matter what you're doing, whether it's magic or whether you're trying to become a doctor or a martial artist or whatever it is that you want to do, meditation is so helpful to be able to clear your mind and focus on a single thing. And that's a skill that I think is lost in our society a lot. It's hard to be content and still.
Mm, yeah, there is a lot of truth to that. I agree with that. I want to welcome all the additional people who piled in here. We've got Wolin, Brian, Kat, a whole heap more. Welcome. If you have any questions or comments as we're going through, please leave those in. I saw that somebody asked a question earlier, which was, I'm late. Can you tell me what your book is about? So can you tell us the name of your book again and what it's about?
My book is The Book of Sin and Shadow, and it's all poetry. And I'm probably going to pull it back down because since I published it as soon as I got out of prison, I was in a big hurry because I had all this stuff written and I was going to seek traditional publishing and go that route with it. And now I'm thinking that's less helpful and I want to bring it back. And I don't know if you've seen any of the poems that I post, but I like to put ritual commentaries on them because I believe that there's no separation between poetry and sorcery or any kind of spoken words and magic. Poetry is just distilled language. And I like to kind of show where my mind was at when I wrote the poem and what the purpose of it is instead of just writing a poem and then letting people look at it and interpret it for themselves. I leave enough room for them to still do that, but I want them to know why I wrote it and where I was at when I put it out. So I'm probably going to pull it back and republish it with that added.
I like that idea. I'm a poet myself. I do a fair amount I integrate poetry into some of my magical work. And I think that what you shared is exactly right in terms of just it being a powerful form, like that for the spoken word and the way that what it brings out and the power of it. One of the things or one of the aspects of magic that I like to work with a lot is the power of the voice and using the voice as a way to not only to express outward into the world around us, but also to draw inward into the inner world and to create that alignment with the internal and the external world. How much, with your own approach to like verbal magic and using poetry and everything, what are some of the practices that you incorporate? You mentioned a little bit about commentary, so I'd love to hear about some of that.
Poetry and magic have been linked probably since the beginnings of both of them.
Hmm.
If you read the old grimoires, there's a lot of rhyming, there's a lot of assonance, a lot of they choose particular words not just for what the words mean, but for the way they sound and the way they come out. And I think that that's always been understood that there's power in that. That if we can, and when you think about it, words are magic because if I say the right words in the right combination to the right person at the right time, and timing and placement are critical, just like with any work of magic. I can make literally anything happen. I can get a job. I can make somebody fall in love with me. I can make somebody hate me. I could start a war or end a war, depending on who I say these words to, how potent the words are, and how directly my meaning is given to them.
Under the right circumstances, the right situation, you can get a person to kneel to you with the right word. So, yeah, I totally get it. Sheena said, future co hosted live magical poetry salon. Well, that may be something we end up doing at some point. I know we've talked about that a little bit, Sheena. Mackenzie said, complete newbie here, so this might be a silly question. I came across your post, Eric, and was very inspired, but I'm curious, when you say magic, what do you mean exactly? Oh, the infamous, what's your definition of magic? All right, we both have to answer this one. So you go first, and
Oh,
then
man.
I'll
All right.
your mind.
Probably the hardest question to answer for anyone that practices magic. And you wouldn't think it would be so difficult, but honestly, it means a lot of different things. I practice sorcery, which is, I think of it as practical spell casting. And I also practice resonance. I meditate. I believe that everything I do is an extension of my magic. Martial arts, working out, working in the garden. There's magic in all of this. And specifically, I do ceremonial magic and ritual magic that people would recognize as magic, but that's not the extent of it, or it doesn't encompass everything that I do. When I first started using magic, I wanted to be able to have agency in a world where I felt like I didn't have any. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that I was changing my subjective to align with the objective instead of the other way around.
Hmm. I'm going to give my own answer to this. And one thing I'll make the joke too that put a couple magicians in the room and you'll come out with like 5 definitions of magic.
I could think of three off the top of my head.
Right, right.
I was just trying to be authentic.
No, no, and I appreciate that. I had to make that joke.
Uh,
When I think about magic and what magic is, I really think of it as both an alignment with your inner truth and reality and the world around you. And it's about creating change and conformity with the identity that you choose to step into. And what I mean by that is that think about a result. When you choose a particular result, you're not just trying to create change in the world around you, you're actually creating change within yourself. You are meeting the result with a change in identity and becoming the result. And so when I look at magic, I think of magic as really being a fundamental change with your agreement with the universe and who and what you are and how you show up. And so that's one of my definitions of magic. A little mystical, a little practical, but it all works out really well.
a short form is magic is a spiritual technology that you practice and all religion. And I've had this discussion with a lot of Christian theologians, and I think that all religion is a sort of practice of magic because you're appealing to a divine being to interact in the world in your favor. and that's no different in Christianity or Hinduism, Islam. All of these all of these religions that don't necessarily call it magic are still practicing magic.
Hmm. So we've got a couple more comments here. Twist the Story says, when you are using magic, are you in alignment with a higher being?
That's an interesting question because I feel like my gods walk with me all the time, whether I'm practicing magic or not. And I try to live by the noble virtues, whether I'm practicing magic or whether I'm walking down the street. So I guess the short answer would be yes, I do.
Hmm. My answer to that would be that I think it depends on the magical working. Sometimes I may end up choosing to work with spirits or deities or what have you, and so there's definitely that aspect. And sometimes I might just be doing practical magic that is wholly of my own effort, but nonetheless is aligning with the world and the spiritual forces in the world that are available and accessible if you're willing to open yourself to them. So kind of think of it in that particular way. Let's talk a little bit about your system a little more in depth, because this is a system that you've been developing. How long have you been practicing this system of magic that you've been developing? And you talked about your sources earlier, so we'll get into that as well a little bit more.
Um, I started really um, studying magic and sorcery 5 years ago. And as I said, I started out with straight rune magic in the style of Edred Thorson, Dr. Stephen Flowers. And from there, I, st- I kept with that tradition for a long time before I started adding little bits and pieces from other systems to it. Now I consider myself a poison path alchemist and sorcerer. Um, Poison being the tool of dissolution, not poison like poisoning people to kill them, but poison as a tool of solve before coagula.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I've walked the poison path myself, and there's definitely a really important element of that in terms of the internal work that we do and the transformation that occurs with it. One thing that I appreciate about your notes on Substack and some of the stuff is that you take a very systemic approach to magic. It's kind of like, well, let's take a look at what's working and what isn't working. And you mentioned earlier that you blend science and magic together. So what are some of the ways that you blend science and magic together in terms of being able to create replicable magical workings? Because I think this is one of the areas where people struggle sometimes.
Well, first of all, not everybody needs that.
Hmm.
That's what works for me, so that's what I do. But I would say quantification, being able to measure some result. If you're trying to get a result, being able to say, okay, that result happened, and then maybe changing a little bit. Or if it doesn't happen, don't throw the whole system out. Change bits and pieces of it in small increments until you hone in what is creating an effect, what is causing that to happen. For example, if you do a lot of people like to use magic for a love spell or for money. So you have to have an actual goal in mind, and then if it works, maybe try to replicate it. And if you can replicate something, then it's clear that you're doing something that is working. That being said, you can't leave it all up to the magic. So it becomes hard because you also have to do the actual work. Like if I cast a money spell, I have to go out and get some money. It's probably not just going to fall straight into my lap. A lot of people want quick fixes and easy answers in magic or any religion. They want the spiritual technology to do the heavy lifting for them, and that's not how magic works, and that's not going to get you any results. So it becomes hard to quantify, I think, because you're also doing mundane tasks towards that goal in the meantime too. But you kind of know when something works. I think it's important to take a lot of notes, keep a journal to see what works and what doesn't, to go back and replicate it.
I agree. I call that marrying the mundane actions with the magical, because it's like okay, you're going to do your magical work, but then it is a matter of actually going out there and doing all the other activities. And where magic comes into play is the alignment of synchronicities, where it's like the unexpected, the unusual, the things that kind of come sideways that you didn't expect and wouldn't expect to occur, but nonetheless happen because that spiritual technology is taking the path of least resistance in order to form the manifestation that moves ahead. There's a real potency to that kind of system and practice when we understand that. And you're not absolved from actually taking action. Like if you want to go out and get a job, you still got to fill out applications. You still got to go to interviews. You still got to, create a resume. You want to bring money into your life, then, one, look at your relationship with money, get to know it, and like, well, what is that relationship? What's going on there? But
Yeah.
also like willing to go and do some things like, create a course or write a book or do some other things. I mean, I think it is so important to have that understanding and not treat magic as a cure all. And I think this is something I see sometimes, not just with magic, but sometimes with some other new age or religious beliefs, where it's kind of like, well, I want to hand off the responsibility to something else and have that take care of everything. And it's like, well, that doesn't quite work that way.
I saw somebody make a post today, and it spoke to this. They said, "I lit candles and complained. Why isn't the universe fixing my problem?" And I think a lot of people look at it like that. Um, I started practicing magic because my life was a mess, and what I was doing wasn't working. And I thought, I've got years to devote myself to this. I'm going to give it every chance to see if it actually works or not, because there's a lot of really smart people who believe it works. And I'm going to find out for myself, if it does work. I'm going to sort it out right now. And I will say, um my life is going great. And I can't necessarily say that it's because of magic, but I can't say that magic didn't help that either. You know, I have people that love me. I have a significant other that means a lot to me. I have a great job that was tailor made for me, that didn't exist before I approached these people and told them my story. And everything has just clicked into place so perfectly that if I deny that magic had a part in that, I think that would be really disingenuous.
No, I agree with that. Welcome. We've got more people here. And for folks, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to drop those in and I'll be happy to share them. And also feel free to smash that heart button if you're enjoying this episode. Um, One thing that kind of I think one thing that you kind of just spoke to that really strikes me is like the importance of actually being able to receive what you've done. Like yes, we go out there, we do magical work, we go and we go and do these things. But as you said, just a moment ago, it's like, hey, I got this job that was tailor made for me. I've got my beloved, I've got other people in my life. How important is it to be able to actually receive in magic? Is that an important component for your magical work? And if so, like what is it? How does that show up?
There's a cosmic law of exchange that definitely applies to magic. Um, you have to be able to give and receive. Those lines have to be open. And it's really hard for some people to receive. It's hard to allow people to give you what you deserve. A lot of people don't like asking for money for things that they do, for services. They say, "Oh, I just did it out of the goodness of my heart." But you also have to realize that you're not just accepting it for yourself out of greed. You accept it so that the person that you did that for is relieved of obligation. You have to take some of that back, or what you're giving doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. There was something you wrote the other day, and I liked it. It was along those lines. It was like, like when someone gives you money, you're honoring them by giving them, by allowing them to give that to you because they're honoring you with your service. And I think that's absolutely true. Like there is just this very real, important aspect to it of receiving and allowing that to come in. All right, we got another question here from Twisted Stories. At what point does one realize if magic went too far? I'm really embracing this way of life, but I feel like it could be taken away any minute. Oof, that's a potent question. I think we both have to answer that one. What's
It
your take
can
on
be.
that?
um, you can lose everything just as fast as you get it. And I think denying, like I just said a minute ago, if I were to deny the magic that put me in the position that I'm in and the magic that's working in my life, I feel like it would be taken away from me. I feel like that accepting it and acknowledging it is part of me giving back to the universe for everything that I've been given. So you can lose everything really quick, just as fast as you gain it, even faster. I know that
Yeah,
from personal experience.
I would say that from personal experience as well. I mean, if you had run into me a few years ago, you would have found that I was living in a home with a friend where cats peed on the floor, and I had 10 boxes and a car to my name, and that was it. And boy, did I feel blessed because I had a place to lay my head while I was putting my life back together because I had lost everything. It happens. Like we can lose everything, and sometimes I would even point out there, or put out there that sometimes the magic we works in ways where it seems like okay, like my whole life has been turned upside down, and it may very well have been. But then look at like what you really want, and how like the thing that oh boy, we got this happening.
At least you're gonna figure out exactly what to do to fix it by the time we're done.
All right, hold on, all right, hold on. This is going to get a little interesting here, but we're far enough along on this and not want to give up on this. So hold on. All right. So speaking of having things taken away, and sometimes we have to adapt, and this is one of the magical principles that I apply. So how do you adjust and adapt when things go a little sideways and as you do?
Um, I try to not get bogged down with the details of it. I tend to not. I tend to be a long term goal person. So if something comes up in my way, I'm not even. I move around that, as much as possible. Um, I find that if you scan back and take a bigger look at your circumstances, then you don't get so caught up in the trivial little mishaps that happen. For example, today I got my check today on the 4-day weekend when the banks are going to be closed on Monday. And at first I was like, ugh, what a terrible day to get my check. But now looking at it a different way, I will still have all of my money on Tuesday when I go to the bank. So, I mean, it's all a matter of perspective, I think. Challenges are just opportunities to grow and be stronger.
Right? Um, you might even give you a chance to think about what you're going to do with it.
Yeah. Well, a good example of that is last month I was saving up for a car. I've been out of prison for 6 months now. This is my 6th month out. And I had all my money saved up to get a car and I was about to buy it. I was going to buy the car that day. And the guy called me and said, "Oh, the car's in the shop. It broke down. So let's wait on that for a second." Well, then my oldest kid came to me and her car broke down. So I had the money set back. I was able to help her fix that. And, that probably happened for a reason. I think things like that happen a lot. Synchronistic things, especially when you practice magic, you start to see the synchronicity in a situation.
Well, and that's the thing. I think that if we can find synchronicity in a situation and make it work, and be open to it without having to try and control a manual, then it actually opens the doors to possibility.
For sure. Don Webb defines magic. He defines it many different ways, like we all do. But one of the ways he defines it is managing synchronicity. And I think that's a really interesting and clever way of looking at magic.
So my next question for you is, where are you going from here? Like, what's next for you? You're starting to share some of your writing. What are some of your plans for the future?
Um, well, right now I'm really focused on a lot of mundane things. I like that Substack exists because it gives me an outlet for all of my writing, and all the different types of writing that I do fit in one place under one roof. And I think that's really cool. But as far as like my personal life, I've got a lot on my plate. I'm coming off of parole. I need to get a place closer to where I work. I need a reliable vehicle so that I don't have to keep borrowing a vehicle whenever I need one. Mundane things like that are what's next for me. I've got a lot to put in order. I spent 40 years throwing my life into the garbage, and it doesn't get fixed just because you decide you want it to. I think in recovery, especially, addicts quit using drugs or they quit drinking, and all of their problems aren't solved, and they're like, well, fuck this, you know. Why am I not doing drugs if my life's still gonna suck? I can at least be high. And that's uh that's unfortunate because recovery doesn't fix your problems for you. It makes it possible for you to fix your own problems. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to fix a lot of the problems that I created in my life and just catch up.
And that goes back to the point that magic isn't going to be a cure-all. We have to take care of like the internal inconsistencies, the challenges, and all of that in order to move forward.
Definitely. Um, Resistance is what makes us strong. When you're lifting weights, if there's no resistance, you will never get any results. If you're trying to make a fire and there's no friction, you're never going to cause that heat that you need. Um, I think a lot of people look at difficulties from the wrong perspective.
I think of difficulties as being one of the most potent sources because it allows us to sharpen ourselves and discover our true potential and turn it into real.
Definitely. I know you're a martial artist also. I've seen some of your posts. Um, I'm also a martial artist. I've studied martial arts my whole life. And the times that I competed and lost were the times where I learned something that pushed me to move forward and try something new and learn something different and expand my skill set. Um, I never learned from a win.
Yeah, your failures are opportunities to discover your success.
Definitely. And they make you appreciate them a lot more too.
So, Eric, we're going to wrap up here. I'd love to be echoing. It's a little too distracting, but I think tonight was pretty good overall. Where can people find you on the web?
I've got a Facebook that's in my real name. I'm Poison Priest on Instagram. Uh, Eric McCormick, Sin and Shadow Press on Substack.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm going to ask you, which I asked everyone when I wrap up these interviews, which is what's the final word or phrase of wisdom that we can carry once you're out into the day?
Don't let anybody tell you how to do it, and don't copy anybody else. Start with a framework, a tradition that works, that has got results for people and that resonates with you, and play with it, practice with it, learn it, and develop your own style and make it yours, and take lots of notes and share with people, because that's how we all learn.
Man after my own heart. I love it.
Thanks for having me on, Taylor. It was really nice to talk to you. I really enjoyed this.
We will do this again at some point. Hopefully, not all the echoing audio issues, but most of the interview was good. So thank you for coming along.
Thank you.